everybody. Reporting to you again from the Glamour City, Hollywood.
Yeah, homes have about 95% less embodied carbon compared to a conventional structure. Also, the operational energy is very low because we've got about a 10-inch thick insulation cavity, and the dome shape reduces the surface area for the same amount of floor space. So compared to a conventional home of the same square footage, we're about 10 times lighter. Also fire resistant and earthquake and hurricane proof, so really like climate proof homes that we have a design life of 500 years. That means we're aiming to build a home that can last for 500 years because it can really be repaired and resurfaced with the same material that it's made from.
If you love listening to this show, please consider giving a rating and a review on Amazon Alexa or wherever you listen. We want to continue bringing you this amazing content, and part of our ability to do that means that we need a big audience. Now, it may not seem like much, but rating and reviewing the show will help more people find us, just like how you found this show. Simply on any podcast platform, search for our show, scroll down to the bottom, and push 5 stars. It's that easy. Thanks for supporting the show. Today, I'm joined by Morgan Bierschenk, founder and CEO of GEOSHIP. Welcome to the show today.
Hey, thanks, Scott.
So, Morgan, you restored a 43-foot classic wooden sailboat. I wonder if you could tell us about that experience.
Sure. Yeah, it was like 2004. I really left my engineering career at Intel Corporation and bought a one-way ticket to Asia and really started vagabonding for a couple of years. And I had an experience, basically a spiritual awakening in 2005. And that really put me on a path of really, how can I be in service to humanity? And so I restored a wooden sailboat as sort of a way to just have a space. I really wanted to build myself a small house in nature, but I couldn't afford land. So I ended up restoring a wooden sailboat, and I lived aboard the boat and cruised around the Pacific for about 6 years.
Now, can you describe the nature of the sailboat? I mean, what are we talking about in terms of mast? And is this something that would be ocean worthy?
Yeah, it was definitely ocean worthy. We were planning to sail around the world, but at the same time, I had really a sort of a calling inside to be more in service. So I ended up right at that time, it was like 2011, and really what was going on was WikiLeaks. So I met Julian Assange and started, I ended up in Iceland, and Iceland really inspired me because the people had just got a new political party in office to really make Iceland like the world's safe haven for information and journalists. So I started working on basically liquid democracy platforms and alternative currencies, and just saw the power in building community. And that led to finally building a house with my brother on Whidbey Island. And he really pioneered the CNC mold making industry. So we started looking at physics first principles. What's the most efficient way to manufacture homes? So that gets us to the geodesic dome and ceramic materials molded in a factory.
So I want to just back up a little bit, because the common narrative is around home. So the sailboat was your home, and you mentioned that having a dwelling on land was probably too expensive. So this notion of home and dwelling, but at the same time, home was also where you happened to be at that moment because of the fact that you sailed around the Pacific and spent time in the Iceland as well. What were some of the kind of profound insights? You talked about service to humanity that, in your mind, really fundamentally changed your trajectory.
Yeah, good question. It's a connection to the natural world. So home for me always felt like, when the boat was on a perfect tack and the wind and the waves are kind of in harmony, synchronicity, you just feel this feeling of like connection and presence that is really home for me. And so we're looking at like how to bring that into our built environment.
That's interesting because I think when we think about more modern dwellings that people live in, tends to be wood structure. It certainly has the symbolism of home, but we're also very much feel like we're somewhat protecting ourselves from the elements, the extremes that are out there, and we're not quite in harmony as much as hiding out in in um, somewhat of an isolation, I suppose. How do you feel from a philosophy that home needs to be, and how do we create homes in a way that embodies and lives in harmony with our environment, but still provides the basic necessities that we need in the feature set of a home?
Yeah, we really look at like what were the original conditions that humans evolved with on Earth in terms of light, water, and electromagnetic environment. So we're designing homes in a way where, of course, you can see you get natural light coming from all directions. There's no toxic chemicals in the home, and it's really replicates nature. You see the geometry around us is the flower of life. It's like how the rivers of magnetism flow around the earth. It's very fundamental. Triangulated sphere is really fundamental to nature. So it feels like a natural home. Everybody can feel it when they walk in, really.
A subtle difference between when we think about home versus a house, from a kind of a social economic stature versus the needs that we have. So if you think about the indigenous peoples around the world, their homes are actually sometimes even mobile. They're able to actually take it and set up, and depending on their herd and migration path, they'll then, establish their new home. Talk to us about kind of that inspiration relative to access around economics and what home has now become, where it's not so much about our function and our need as much as just lavishness and access.
The digital nomadism, people want like a movement really around people wanting to have more, not feel like they're tied down to a home, but still have home, that feeling of home, that connection to community and to the natural world. And I think round spaces in general have really, it was really the primary form of housing on Earth until maybe the last 500 years. So more round structures are kind of natural, and they're sort of associated with more nomadic, hunting and gathering and tribal. And I think we can do the same thing, but we don't actually take the home with us. We can build homes that last for 500 years and are in harmony with the local ecosystems, yet have through different ownership models and whatnot, have that mobility and freedom without being kind of anchored to the home.
Well, I think the last several years has been very interesting, especially in the context of COVID, where there was a surge in mobile homes. We're talking about, let's say, homes that trucks, let's say that's been retrofitted to actual mobile homes, RVs, and so forth. People wanting to be able to be mobile and be on the road, but still have the basics of their comfort. And in addition to that, kind of a broader set of trends, I think, is that certainly among, let's say, millennials and Gen Zs to some extent, that nomadic lifestyle where they're not tied down to a mortgage, tied down to a specific area, but they make their home wherever they are. They happen to be traveling to and settle for a short period of time. So given some of those trends and the fact that, I think from a generational, baby boomers and millennials are very different. I think the home ownership patterns are a little bit different. Affordability is very different. So smaller homes, modular homes, container homes have been more popular with millennials, for instance. So how does GeoShip kind of fit within all those different trends?
How GeoShip fits into those trends is really the village building model that we're bringing. So the home is one thing, and then how we develop villages is another thing. And today, it's still basically banks and developers get together and buy land and build houses and then sell them to people. And that's really like a pre-internet business model. And we see in the future, the instead of a housing development, you have a village, because the people who are going to live there come together first online and start to build relationships and participate in the design and construction of the village. And when you have that sort of democratization to some level of the development process, then you also have the ability to really bring in new ownership structures so that people might own shares in multiple villages and have the kind of freedom to go from one, live the digital nomad life, yet still have homes in different locations.
Yeah, believe it or not, I've actually heard somewhat of similar set of thesis before. This notion that instead of set of subdivision where people are purchasing assets or properties and then they are basically put into a situation where they have to get to know these new strangers in terms of neighbors, versus establishing those relationships first, and based on those relationships, you start to look for those enclaves or communities. And certainly there are property developers that are creating this, let's call it premium enclaves around the world, somewhat around the kind of model that you're talking about. But let's take a little step back. You and your brother have been working on this for some time, and both of you bring complementary skill sets. Talk to us about the uniqueness of the GeoShip and the shape, as well as the biocrete, bioceramic materials and substrates that's being used.
Sure. Yeah, so our Earth shot is to make the best home on Earth the most affordable one. So in order to do that, we approach home building from physics first principles. So we're really looking at this structure is, there's no metal, there's no wood, there's no concrete, and there's no petrochemicals. Every component, including from the frame to the exterior, the interior, and the insulation material, are all bioceramic and carbon fiber or hemp fiber composites that are molded in a factory. So when you're basically, there's no assembly in the factory and there's no cutting things in the factory. So it can be very efficient kind of mass manufacturing, and also end up with basically a container full of components that are relatively easy to put together on site. It's more like, putting together a piece of IKEA furniture or something instead of a traditional construction project. So it's really like a productization of home, of the house structure. And some of the advantages there, these homes have about 95% less embodied carbon compared to a conventional structure. Also, the operational energy is very low because we've got about a 10-inch thick insulation cavity, and the dome shape reduces the surface area for the same amount of floor space. So compared to a conventional home of the same square footage, we're about 10 times lighter, just in mass. And so really also fire resistant and earthquake, hurricane proof, so really like climate proof homes that we have a design life of 500 years. That means we're aiming to build a home that can last for 500 years, because it can really be repaired and resurfaced with the same material that it's made from. It's a new material science that was developed at US National Labs and kind of the late 90s and early 2000s, about a 10-year R&D project. And the material it kind of sits in the middle of a ceramic, a cement, and an epoxy, in that it has the bonding ability of a ceramic, but the bonding ability of an epoxy, but more crystalline like a ceramic, and doesn't require high heat like a traditional ceramic. So it's kind of like a cement to that level. So really new properties that I think open up a different way to manufacture homes.
I think in many ways, it really fundamentally changes the paradigm of how you actually both develop homes, but also maintain it, because the fact that is, unlike a very complicated system where when the whole system, something fails, you have to really address the entire system. Here, it's so modularized that you basically address essentially the puzzle pieces. And the replacement of that is relatively easy. And that's certainly from a manufacturing instead of prefab, where you have framing and panels and insulation and so forth. It's really very smallest form of the least common denominator of component that you basically piece it together to make the entire dome. So it really challenges how we think about things. But with that also comes education, because again, I think for some time, let's say 10 years or so, 3D printing has been something that has been promising to change, lower the cost, make it much more affordable, and provide a lot of the hurricane level 5 types of protection that new homes are starting to be exposed to around the world. So talk to us about education. Just when people are starting to get comfortable with modular homes and trailer homes and 3D printing, how should they think about this particular model?
Yeah, great question. So we really see a new home building industry is arising, and there's kind of three types of new homes. It's like manufactured homes or modular homes where they're building a module in a factory. And then there's 3D printed homes where they're basically printing the wall structure on site and some of the interior cabinets and countertops and whatnot. And then there's panelized, where we're making components in a factory that are assembled on site. And GEOSHIP fits into the panelized section of sort of the new housing industry, I'd say. And when you compare to 3D printing, I think ICON is aiming for like a 10 to 30% reduction in the construction cost of a new home. And what 3D printing is really a wall system. It's not the roof. And this structure is the roof as well as the walls. And we're at sort of market entry price at around $200 a square foot. But as the technology scales, we can get the turnkey price of a new home down to about $75 a square foot. And that's for multiple, any size, whether it's a 350 square foot structure or a 3,000 square foot structure.
So let's talk about that. So talk to us about extensibility. How does the dome model work? So, what's kind of the base size in terms of square footage? And if you wanted to have equivalency of, let's say, 3,000 square foot home, how would that be attained?
Yeah, so we're doing domes of 3 different sizes. The smallest one here is a 18-foot interior diameter, which gives you about 350 square feet. You have a little half loft in it. The next size dome is a 32-foot exterior diameter, and the next size dome is about a 44-foot exterior diameter. So that medium dome is a total of about 1,100 square feet. All the domes, the medium and big dome, both have a second story, and the second story is usually a half loft. So 1,100 square feet and about 2,000 square feet in the bigger dome. And all 3 of those different domes can be connected together to give you a lot of different sort of configurations. So like the most common house in the US is, about 2,400 square feet, 3 bedroom plus a den and maybe 2 bathrooms. And that's basically 2 medium-sized domes connected together. It gives you that kind of floor plan.
So again, because of the fact that we're just panelized, like I said, how do you have the joining walls in such a way that you can actually have pass through? So architecturally, if you could talk through us about that, as well as just the practical aspects of electricity, plumbing, HVAC, and so forth, and just making sure that it fits within the traditional permitting process.
Yeah, so the structure is designed to meet the international residential codes. And, the codes are really focused on like strength and safety. And those are 2 things that this structure just totally excels in. The geodesic dome is the lightest, strongest, efficient means of enclosing space known to man, according to the American Institute of Architects. And the ceramic materials, they're ultra high strength and have a lot of carbon fiber and hemp fiber in the inside, carbon fiber in the outside. So it gives you a lot of ductility. So you have an ultra high strength, high ductile material in the most strongest shape known to man. So it really building codes are, we meet the international residential codes by maybe even order of magnitude on some measures. And interior, like plumbing and electrical, is very similar to a conventional home in that you first have a frame, and then you put the exterior on, and then you can run all your electrical and plumbing, and then you have to put the interior on and fill the insulation cavity.
The plumbing, for example, is that fairly kind of a turnkey, or would that be differently configured based on the needs of that particular homeowner or the developer?
It's all based on the needs of the homeowner. So as far as like floor plans, we'll have basically underneath the loft is where you have full dividing walls. So a lot of that, like a bathroom and a kitchen, might be just below the loft. And because you have I think most single family geodesic homes will be like 2 or 3 domes connected together. So it gives you more separation of space in that sense. But this is one thing buyers are looking for the most today, is like natural light and open floor plans. So the geodesic fits well into that, while still delivering the basic level of like separation that you need in bathrooms and kitchens and bedrooms.
Okay, let's talk about use cases. So, I think there are use cases where it's very relevant and very helpful, but in some cases it's not as relevant as well. But let's talk about some of the use cases. You mentioned co-housing, or kind of these villages or communities, and certainly from whether it's Airbnb properties or even enclaves that premium hotel resort chains are trying to create, that creates that community but still have that privacy, for example. And certainly the emergency housing aspects, although it's a little bit more expensive right now. You guys are working towards $75 per square foot, but certainly those regions that are heavily affected by extreme hurricane, let's say level 4 or 5, tornadoes, and some of those extreme weathers, certainly makes a lot of sense. Talk to us about, in your opinion, where are the sweet spots from a market segment?
Yeah, so we're entering the market with really auxiliary dwelling units and retreat centers. So we see really strong demand from people who want like an office or a yoga or meditation space or kind of art studio, because there's no better place to like think outside the box, essentially. And also with Airbnb, the number one rental on all of Airbnb for all time is like a little geodesic dome in the woods, because people are looking for something different when they go and travel. And we also see really strong demand from people who are setting up kind of retreat centers, either spiritually or ecologically focused retreat centers. So that's kind of our market entry niche. And our ultimate market is, I think, like most home builders, it's like affordable communities, affordable, sustainable communities.
Yeah, makes sense. But I think realistically, I mean, I don't foresee, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't foresee that you guys are going to be replacing subdivision models anytime soon. Is that correct?
No, I think we'll replace subdivision models pretty quickly.
Okay. And geographically, let's just talk about the United States. Where would you guys be most appropriate for, and why?
Well, I mean, definitely in the, like you said, the extreme weather areas. Like here in Nevada City, we're in fire country. It's a fireproof home, so this is a great market for us. Also in Florida, where there's a lot of hurricanes, it's a great market. In the Midwest, where they have tornadoes, it's a great market. And also both because there's nothing for mold to grow on and nothing for insects to eat. So it's a great market where you have high humidity, or like Southern California, where there's a lot of insect challenges, and also very high insulation values, so great in northern climates. So, a lot of different geographies, especially the most extreme ones.
Yeah, I think from an extreme, I agree, including, I think you mentioned that some of this technology originates from defense or maybe even aerospace, for example. It's because ultimately some of these structures are going to be needed on the moon, for example, Mars, but probably more subterranean under the ground because of harmful radiation. But regardless, I think where I'm struggling is, how likely is this going to be really broad-based adoption versus more of those edge cases? And for us to have that sustainability footprint, can it actually scale enough and be adopted enough so that it actually makes sense? And certainly there are, places around the world where they are really regularly faced with these things, and they can't afford to rebuild their home every time there's a hurricane, tornado, or some flooding, for instance. So it certainly plays a critical part. So just trying to figure out where you guys add the most value versus, realistically trying to replace an existing legacy business.
Yeah, well, like I said, those niches are definitely places where we add the most value. And I'd say also, if you look at some of those benefits that I mentioned, 100% non-toxic, 95% reduced carbon footprint, disaster resilience, and the cost factor, it's like, why would the average buyer want to pay 3 times more money to live in a box? I think that it just, round homes have just not been really on the menu in general, or they actually cost more. So when you can bring the round home, something different, down to a lower price point than the conventional home, and offer all this list of benefits that the conventional home has none of, I think it will be pretty attractive to a wide variety of people.
Well, certainly for me, I don't know if I would replace my primary home with this, but having as a secondary, whether it's on premise as like you said, a art or exercise, or just that space where I can just think. So those kinds of markets certainly is very attractive, and I can see that, as well as those that have certain budget constraints and they can't necessarily enter the typical housing market, for instance. Talk to us briefly about where you guys are in terms of product development, because my understanding is that this is in prototype stage.
Yeah, so we raised about a $1.5 million pre-seed round a couple of years ago, and just completed this first functional prototype. And now the next stage is pilot development or pilot manufacturing. So we'll be by 12 to 18 months from now, we'll be at like a dome a week or a dome a month kind of level. And then the first full-size factory we have planned will be around 150,000 square feet with a capacity of about 50,000 domes per year, 50,000 small domes, or 20,000 big domes. And the production capacity per cubic foot of factory space is a big part of the story here, and just because you're molding.
Absolutely. And talk to us about the kind of the pre-order. What's the kind of pent-up demand, and once they actually receive it, what would be needed to actually set it up?
Yeah, so we actually only opened pre-orders for about a month, and we got about $40 million in product pre-ordered, and we're actually going to reopen pre-orders pretty quickly here. And in this case, the shell, or structure, and in this case finished shell, so there's no exterior finish work or interior finish work, is about 50% of the cost. So the base price for the small dome is about $33,000, and by the time it's all in and installed, you're at about $65,000. And for the bigger dome, $100,000 base price and about $200,000 all in. And as the technology scales, I think those prices will basically come down by a third, or into a third, come down by 2/3.
Well, super. Well, I am, believe it or not, I'm actually very excited about it, and I very hopefully look forward to, you didn't mention United Nations, but there's United Nations and also defense and general military, and bases that have to be erected very quickly, as well as there's a lot of bases around the world that's deteriorating that needs to provide housing and some of these dwellings for the military, and be able to deal with some of the extreme weathers, depending where they are. So very excited about the project. I've been joined by Morgan Bierschenk, CEO of GEOSHIP. Thanks for joining today.
All right. Thank you, Scott.
If you've enjoyed this episode, take a moment to rate our show on any podcast platform that you listen to. Scroll down to the bottom and push 5 stars. It's that easy. And as always, thanks for listening.